All right, Alexander, let's do a military update as to what is happening in Ukraine. But before we get to the situation on the front lines, let's talk a bit about Czech Republic President Pavel and his artillery shells scheme. And that's what it was, a scheme. We talked about this in a video 2 months ago, and you noted that this scheme will fail. I believe it was 800,000 shells that he wanted to purchase on the open market, on the black market. And you made the prediction that these shells would be overpriced, of course, and a lot of them would be duds. They would be faulty. They would be ineffective. They would have problems. They wouldn't be of good quality. And the Financial Times the other day admitted as much, that the shells that Pavel was procuring, a lot of them are faulty and just useless, specifically the ones that he got from Africa and Asia. Completely predictable. But let's discuss this scheme and then get to the front lines.
Completely predictable and completely predicted. It's exactly what we said would happen. All you have to do is go back and watch some of our programs, the programs that we made, the programs each of us made on our respective channels at the time when the scheme was first proposed. We were said that, when you go to this kind of market, the international arms market, for God's sake, with infinite amounts of money, because this is what it amounts to. If you come along with billions and billions and billions of euros and say, I need to buy shells and I have to have these shells, they're really, really very important. You'll find all kinds of people who will come along and will say to you, well, you need shells. Of course we got shells. We got shells, but these come at a price. We can only supply them with some difficulty, but, be assured these are real shells. We can provide them. And of course, the price will grow and grow and grow and keep rising. And then when you finally get the shells, you will find that most of them are duds. And surprise, surprise, that's what we said would happen. Surprise to surprise, Financial Times tells us that is exactly what has happened. They're saying that around half the shells are duds, so they have to be completely refurbished in order to make them effective. And so they also tell us exactly what we said, that the price of these shells is rising all the time. Now, we said this is what would happen. We're not people with vast amounts of, data about the world. We just know how people in these kind of markets behave. We've seen this already. I mean, you've been in business. I've worked in the legal world. We've seen this kind of thing. Again, this kind of behavior, this idea that you can resolve your problems with schemes of this kind, shows again that Western leaders are not living in the real world. If you come to a market like this with infinite sums of money, there are going to be lots and lots of people who will rub their hands with glee and will say, here's the mug. This is the moment when we can take advantage. And surprise, surprise, that's exactly what's happened.
It leaves you speechless. It really does leave. I'll tell you one group that is very happy with everything that happened with these shells are the weapons dealers.
Oh yeah, of course.
Black market weapons dealers.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're laughing all the way to the bank.
Absolutely. Their banks in the Cayman Islands, the Turks and Caicos, and all sorts of other interesting islands. Most of them, by the way, British administered in some form. Just saying. But that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, from their point of view, this has been a spectacular success. I mean, the chomp came along with the deep pockets. They've lightened those pockets, and they've made themselves, a very nice amount of money out of this. Several tens of billions, I understand. Well, several billions, I understand.
Yeah. It's like the guy selling you the fake Rolex for $5,000, for $10,000.
Well, exactly.
You actually buy it.
Well, actually, you actually buy it, yeah.
You have those guys all over Greece that are selling you those fake Rolexes, yeah.
I know. Precisely. As I said, these people, let's repeat again, do not live in the real world. The people who make the decisions, they make claim that they're the masters of the universe and that they understand all about economics and things of that kind. But they don't understand how things really happen in the world. It's the same with the oil price cap, which again, we predicted what a complete failure that would be. And it's the same with this particular scheme as well. It's, but they set themselves up for this, and they will go on doing so. And we can laugh and joke about this, but remember, the money has come from European taxpayers. It's their money, and that's been lost in this kind of bizarre operation. I mean, if it was happened in the business world, there wouldn't just be all hell to bay. There would probably be referrals to the police and an investigation, that kind of investigation.
They didn't go out and try to purchase these artillery shells with Pavel's money in
No,
his account and Ursula's money in her account and
no.
Borel's money. Nope. It's real easy to do this kind of stuff, and it's real easy to mess up when it's the
When it's
taxpayers'
someone else's
money or it's
money,
printed
exactly.
money. Yeah,
When it's someone
no
else's money
problem.
and you're not accountable or responsible for it. So if you mess up, well, you're sort of embarrassed for a while, but it isn't really going to affect you very much.
Are they embarrassed? I don't even think
No, they're
I
not
don't
really
even think they have
embarrassed.
that
They
capability.
they don't have that capability. They're moving on to the next scheme. In fact,
All right, so
I'm going to just say
yeah.
quickly, Phil, on this. On the contrary, within this little world, this scheme has probably enhanced Pavel's reputation.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
convinced the others that he's a full player, that he's absolutely one of the team, and for them, that's what ultimately counts.
He's a loyal member of the club. Yeah.
Exactly.
The ship of fools.
Ship of
He's a
fools.
loyal
Yeah.
he's a loyal sailor on the ship of fools. Anyway, let's that's a good segue, I guess. I don't know. I guess to what's going on the front line, which is a shipwreck, a disaster, a train wreck
It is an
for
absolute
the
disaster.
Ukraine military. What a disaster! Anyway, let's what we have four fronts, right? So
Yeah.
which front
Well,
should
let's
we be
start. I mean,
looking at?
I
Which
think two things to
fronts
say.
should we be looking
Firstly, Kharkiv, because there's been an awful lot of attention there. Lots of claims from Ukrainians, also of commentators, that the situation has been stabilized. Yesterday, the first admissions that what has really happened is that Ukrainian troops in Volchansk are now trapped. I mean, I've seen this now confirmed by various people. All you have to do is look at a map. You can see where some of these troops are. They're north of a river. All the bridges have been crossed. The Russians have fire control over the river. I don't know how many troops there are there, but they are trapped. And the Russians are now starting to deploy armored forces to the area. And there's reports, there's hundreds of thousands, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry says 300,000 extra troops, 300,000 extra troops preparing to enter the battle in the northern parts of Ukraine. Which, by the way, if it is true, and we know we have to wait and see whether it is true. If it is true, that is going to be decisive. I mean, there is no way Ukraine, with its increasingly exhausted army, could withstand a blow of that kind with a force brought by a force of that kind. So they're trapped in Volchansk. And it turns out that a lot of them are also trapped in the other place where this big battle is taking place, which is Chasiv Yar. Now, this is an absolutely horrific battle. The Ukrainians are trying to hold on to a position, to a micro district, a sort of small built up area east of an aqueduct that sort of bisects Chasiv Yar. It seems those troops are completely surrounded. They're some of Ukraine's best troops, who Zelensky and Syrskyi placed there. They're being bombed and bombed by the Russians and shelled by the Russians. And there's fighting going on in this micro district, as it's called. I've seen pictures. As I said, it's straight out of Hieronymus Bosch or something like that. It's Dante's vision of hell. I mean, it's absolutely terrible to think what these troops must be experiencing. And even as that group of Ukrainian troops looks like it's about to be surrounded, or well, actually is surrounded, it looks like the larger town of Chasiv Yar is soon going to be surrounded as well, with the Russians now emplaced on the flanks, um, both to the south and to the west, to the north, rather, preparing, I think, for, sort of pincer advance, which will probably materialize in the next few weeks once this holdout in this district east of the aqueduct has fallen. So, as I said, a terrible battle. Um, you, some Ukraine's best troops being lost in this awful way. And the pattern repeats itself elsewhere. I understand that the Ukrainian troops are now basically surrounded, or some of them are surrounded or trapped in another town called Krasnogorivka, further to the south. The Russians have broken through all Ukraine's strongest defense lines in the central part of the front lines, in a place where north and west of Avdiivka. I saw a report that they're now closing in on the major logistics bases that the Ukrainian army in Donbass has been using in places like Pakrovsk. Apparently, they're within 13 kilometers of another town on the way to Pakrovsk called Selidovo, which is another major, holding place. Um, the situation is terrible. And lastly, there was a major breakthrough by the Russians further south in places where there was intense fighting last year. Two small villages, Staromayorsk and Urozhaine, which the Ukrainians fought to capture and suffered horrific losses seeking to capture. It looks like Staromayorsk is mostly captured by the Russians, perhaps completely captured by the Russians. Urozhaine also. And the Russian forces here, again, are very strong. And they are also preparing a further advance. And all of this with an army still, most of the men in their 40s, very tired, very exhausted. Mobilization apparently not going particularly well. Reports that people who are turning up on the front lines on the Ukrainian side have had a couple of days training, and that's all. And I mean, we can imagine what that is doing to these soldiers when they're deployed to the front line in that way. Reports of more and more surrenders by more and more Ukrainian troops. And it's important to say that though we are now seeing the regular Russian army in action, I mean, the forces in Kharkiv come from the regular Russian army, it is still true to say that the Russians haven't seriously started yet. They still have hundreds of thousands of troops in reserve. Maybe these 300,000 men that we've been hearing about are the ones that are going to be sent from that reserve to finally join the battle. But the bulk of the Russian forces have still been assembling in the rear. And even as we've been laughing at General Pavel and all of that, reports now that the Russians are producing 4.5 million shells a year. The West, nowhere close to that. The United States trying to open a new shell production factory which can produce 30,000 shells a month, but that won't be apparently fully up and running for several years, with machine tools and workers, to some extent imported from Turkey, by the way. I mean, the whole picture is dismal, and it's equally dismal right across the entire situation with weapons production right across the West. Scholz is now saying that Germany has exhausted its ability to support Ukraine. More and more countries in Europe refusing to give up their Patriot missiles. the situation on the front lines is terrible. But of course, as we discussed in another video, um, even as the crisis point in Ukraine approaches, the Western powers taking more and more risks and becoming engaging in ever greater gambles.
So the Ukraine military is having a very difficult time with the mobilization. Putin even mentioned the other day that they'll probably start mobilizing 18-year-olds. That's coming. They're now at 24, 25. Sooner or later, they're going to start at 18-year-olds. But it's not going well at all. Do you have any indication the size of Ukraine's fighting force? Does anyone know how large Ukraine's army is at the moment? Because
No,
it does look like Russia's war of attrition is very effective. I mean, even collective West media is talking about the fact that Ukraine is running out of soldiers. NBC News put out an article that said that Ukraine is running out of soldiers. But do we have any indications what
well,
that means?
you see, this is one of the reasons it's very difficult to get a clear picture is because we're told that Ukrainian forces are 40% below strength. Brigades are typically 40% below strength. Now, Ukraine has around 100 brigades. Now, if a brigade is at full strength, I believe that would produce around 400,000 men. But if they are 40% at 40% strength, that probably means 250,000. Probably that's roughly the right number. Now they're on the defense, and it's easier to fight from the defense than from the attack. You need to outnumber your enemy, apparently. At least, well, of course, the Russians also have this enormous preponderance in equipment, but it's likely by now that the Russians do outnumber the Ukrainians on the battlefronts for the first time in the war. But obviously, if the Russians are about to commit another 300,000 men, it's game over, because that would be more than the probable number of Ukrainian forces that are still fighting.
And the goal for the mobilization was around 150,000. That was the goal
Yes,
that Ukraine set for this
yes.
mobilization. And the
Well,
training time I've heard of 2 months at most. Is that
yeah,
also correct?
yes, yes. I mean, it's which is completely insufficient. And in fact, we're getting reports that people are turning up on the front lines with no more than a few days training. As the need to fill the gaps becomes greater and greater. I mean, this is a tragic situation. Um, and 150,000 is the goal of the mobilization. But back in the autumn, they were saying they needed 500,000 men. So they've already massively scaled down. They're keeping soldiers who've been fighting for the whole 2 years on the front line, and they're exhausted and very angry about this. And they're being encouraged to mobilize and to bring all these young men into battle. And before long, I suspect very old men into battle. I would not be surprised if soon we'll be seeing 60-year-olds and people like that. Uh, um, they've been encouraged to do that by the West. And I have to say, this is for me one of the cruelest things I've ever seen, that Western governments are insisting, because they are, that Ukraine mobilize its youth, destroy itself, in other words, in order to keep back a Russian tide, which it cannot keep back, and throwing these young people who are few in number in Ukraine, relatively few in number in Ukraine, because of the country's long-standing demographic problems, into this nightmare of a war against an army, the Russian army, which is more numerous, far better trained, far better equipped, and far more powerful. I mean, it's one of the most terrible things I've ever seen. I would, you know, I could use much stronger words. I'm not going to on this program, but um, I think that the people in the West who have been demanding this thing, if they had shame and any sense of guilt, I think they would be overwhelmed by what they've done. But of course, they have neither of that. No one with a conscience,
Yeah.
no one with a conscience would do this.
That's why they're in the positions that they are
That's
in.
why
That's
they're
why
in.
they want to keep. That's why they want to keep Zelensky in as president, even though Putin, and I imagine his legal team are very confident of the fact that Zelensky, according to the Ukrainian constitution, is illegitimate. I don't
Yeah.
think Putin would make those claims if his legal team did not feel confident that the constitution says as much. But they have to keep Zelensky in because they need him to continue to try and mobilize and continue to wage this war at least until November 2024.
Yeah. That's exactly
So
right.
why? Yeah, and Zelensky did say, you're right. Zelensky did say before he exited that he needs 500,000 soldiers. So how come Russia just doesn't open up another offensive in the direction of Sumy,
Well, they
which a lot of
might
people
do.
are talking about?
They might do. We don't, and trying to second guess what the Russians are going to do is always very, very difficult. And it's plausible that the Russians have had problems of their own. I mean, assembling hundreds of thousands of men, equipping them, training them, organizing them into forces, finding proper commanders. I'm sure all of this is very complicated and it takes time. Um, and it may be that from a Russian point of view, they're still not fully ready. But they will be, and the day when they are, if that is what's holding them back, is coming closer. And in the meantime, we're already seeing the effect of what they're doing is really starting to tell. Ukraine is breaking down at every part of the front lines. And by the way, the losses Ukraine is suffering every day now are horrendous. Well over 1,000 men killed and wounded every single day. I mean, just take a step back and think of what that means to an army that is already exhausted. At this rate, if we are correct in assuming Ukraine has 250,000 men still in fighting, then by the end of the year, the number of dead or wounded Ukrainians will be greater than the force Ukraine currently has in the field.
Yeah. All right. We will end it there. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code GetReady15 and get 15% off all merch. Take care.